Hello. Welcome to Saturday's live event, office hours 10.5. Let me begin this evening by saying I am so sorry about last week. That was not awesome. I did a bunch of software upgrades. I did not, quite clearly, vet them properly, and consequently, it was not good. Encoding was bad, very bad. Hopefully this week things will be much better. Consequently, I have a fairly sizable backlog of questions that I want to get to left over from last week. And so I'm going to dive right in. Good morning, Susan. Hello. Welcome to the chat. Looks like things are working a little better tonight. This is very exciting. I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank you if you've chosen to subscribe and hope that you'll choose to do so. And, of course, the chat is open, and I will get to those questions just as soon as I can. I'll intersperse the chat questions with what I have left over from last week. So diving right in, what should one consider when singing a duet with the opposite gender? Any special considerations when writing a duet? Such a cool question. Duets are like one of my favorite things in the world to sing or play or anything. And I think the main thing that comes to my mind when I think about duet writing is the key. You want to be very, very conscientious of your key selections so that the melody for both vocalists is in a very, very reasonable range for each of the individual vocalists. You want to consider their particular skill sets. Hello, Maz Sitama. Good afternoon to you. Consider their skills, their range, and place the key of your tune accordingly. It never pays to put it in too high or too low of a key and have somebody struggling to manage the song and the harmony parts. There was another question left over from last week, and there's a bunch more on my sheet here, but there's one that came to mind as well about debunking myths. What are the big myths around singing that I felt ought to be debunked? And what I said last week that got chopped off was that I'm going to hold on to that as a running question because right off the top of my head, there's two main things that come to mind. And I mentioned these last week, but they got chopped off again. One is this idea that we're supposed to stick our stomachs out when we inhale and then suck them all back in when we start the singing process. It's a very, very commonly taught method for breathing for singers, and the information just doesn't support it. I'm sorry to say. I always feel very conscientious when I throw that out there because it is such a commonly taught thing to do. You can see it. It's all over the place. Stick your stomach out to inhale, suck it in when you start to exhale. And I did that for a very, very long time. And always wondered why I would have these consistent problems despite lots and lots of practice. And then I started doing some reading, some research, got connected up with Richard Miller's teachings, and read about his method for breath support, which is the Apogeo breath management system. It's an understanding of it, and I read it and I read it again and again and again, and it just didn't make sense because it just conflicted with what I had been taught for such a long time. And I finally had to go and find someone who had studied in the school. I couldn't find anyone that studied with Richard Miller. But I found someone who went to Northwestern University who had studied in that line of instruction. And that's when I came to understand Apogeo and how we organize both our expansion and engagement. And it changed everything. It was the most significant change I've made to my voice in many, many years. Exactly, Susan. I know, and there's many. It was the way I was taught for a very long time. I was taught to stick it out and pull it in, stick it out and pull it in. And what I always say is, don't take my word for it. Don't believe me. go and look up Shirley Emmons, who has a very, very concise and easily digestible web page on Apagio breath management. Look up Richard Miller and see if you can find a book. The book Training Tenor Voices I think it's out of print now, so to get a copy of it is exorbitantly expensive. But the Training Soprano Voices is very reasonably priced. At least last time last time I checked. Read what he has to say about it. It is perhaps yet another take on things. However, it had an incredibly dramatic impact on my voice. The other main myth that I came up with last week to debunk was this notion of our voices being broken. That head voice, exactly, Susan, Shirley Emmons, yeah. That there's a point in our voices that's somehow disconnected or something. And that head voice is something fundamentally different than our chest voices. And while it is different, and there's a different set of muscles that get activated when we make that transition, the head voice is part of our normal voices. When I'm speaking to you now, I would say that I'm speaking to you in a thyroarytenoid dominant mode, chest voice. But my cricothyroid muscles are still working a little bit. And getting the balance right between those two is what happens in the zona de passaggio. And then getting into the head voice is the process of letting the cricothyroid muscles, cricoarytenoid muscles, I always get those two mixed up. The cricothyroid, cricoarytenoid muscles playing a dominant role, but the thyroarytenoid muscle is still working too. It's just a teeter-totter where one starts to work more and have more control over the voice. That becomes the head voice. And when we sing with that, when we sing with the intention of creating balance between those two sets of muscles, we get what sounds like a very, very wide range chest voice. And that's the myth, that we can somehow push or stretch our chest voices higher and higher and higher and higher. In my experience, that mostly leads to fatigue and potentially long-term consequences, including injury. But when we learn to balance them and we make a successful transition, then we get the appearance of this extremely wide-range chest voice. But there's a transition in there. Hello, Zoroku. I hope that this week's transmission is better. I did a bit of looking around, trying to optimize things. So I'm going to hold on to that myth question. I'm going to keep on coming back to that. I'm going to take a question here from the sheet, and then I'm going to get to your question, Maz Sitama. FYI, for those of you that email questions, you'll notice I never, ever say names. But when I read questions off the screen here, I'll call out who typed it on the screen because I figure you can all see it anyways. But if you want to be anonymous about your questions, email them in. I don't even have names on this sheet. I purposely take them off when I copy the questions over. How to find out my vocal range, and is it possible to increase it? Oh, I skipped one. How to check if I do something correctly, like strain, control, or something? And can I do a tutorial about singing with rasp or distortion? Okay, if you're feeling strain, that's a pretty good indication. If you're feeling like tense, really tense here, if you find that you can only sing for short periods of time, that's very, very good that the stream is working better. Thank you, Zoroku. Thank you, Susan. So if you're feeling strain here, quite honestly, if you're feeling much of anything at all, it's quite likely that you're straining a little bit. If you're really trying to control your sound, you are almost certainly exerting more vocal fold engagement than is necessary to create a well-aligned sound. And that's a tricky one, because it's not as if we want to do nothing. We have to do quite a lot to sing effectively. But that comes in the form of engagement and airflow and monitoring body position, having a forward-thinking approach to the music, so thinking ahead, trying to engage our ears so that we're listening and thinking ahead. And then, when it comes to checking, recording oneself, especially recording with an accompaniment, I need to say that more frequently, because I very frequently will get people that have recorded themselves just singing a cappella, and we have to record ourselves with accompaniment as well. Doing the a cappella versions of things can be really, really helpful in terms of listening without distraction. So you can really just hear the timbre of your voice, hear what's going on, and take it all in that fashion. Singing along with accompaniment, though, and holding oneself accountable to key area, and intonation, and very specific intonation, really, really listening for the intonation of your voice, is really important too. And that's what I mean by recording oneself. Furthermore, if you're hearing intonation issues, I deal with that as an alignment and airflow problem, not as I need to force myself to sing that pitch in tune problem. If we just try to focus on singing in tune, we're not focusing on the action verbs. The action verbs that help us to sing in tune are engagement, airflow, line, things like that. So I was going to take that question. Now, Maz, I'm starting to get to grips with Apagio. It's incredible. However, I'm having issues with using the correct amount of support. I tend to use too much. Do you have any tips? Yeah. Move around a little bit, shift your shoulders, roll your shoulders front, roll them back, put your hands over your head. When I do that, I clasp my hands like this, and I kind of try to pull my elbows apart so that I get a little bit of arm tension happening. That has the effect of forcing the ribs to come out a little bit more and also engage the muscles of your back. I find that as you move around and just be more body aware, you will start to ease off of too much support. In other words, oftentimes we overcompensate. We start to support way too much initially. And it needs to be a dynamic system. It's going to change as we ascend or descend, all those, in going through different things. If we're holding a really long phrase, we're going to feel that engagement over time. We're going to feel that fatigue over time. If we have a lot of really short phrases and we have to take really short little sips of air, but very, very frequently, that will feel differently too. It's getting accustomed to these things. And doing a lot of different phrases. Do some short phrases. The videos where you do the he thing. So like you're singing he. If you can't hear that, I'm taking a little breath in between every note. He. Those kinds of exercises can really help balance. That's what it's meant to do. It's meant to help you balance how much engagement and how much airflow you're using within a given range. So that's a comfortable range for me. Doesn't take a whole lot of air. He. And consequently, I've done that exercise untold hundreds or thousands of times. It didn't take that long to figure it out. But that's the process. We've got to practice these things and be very, very aware of how we're using our bodies and how we're engaging with it. We're looking for a balanced sound. Listen for a balanced sound as you keep on working towards adjusting your support. I want to tackle another question off of here. Actually, Zoroko, you're saying you don't know your vocal range. This person here is saying, how do you find out your vocal range, and is it possible to increase it? They also mentioned... that's another question. Okay, I'll get to that in a second. By the way, I am still taking live questions, so if you've got questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. I got a bit of a backlog here because of last week's, debacle with the encoding. So I'm going to kind of intersperse them, but please feel free to type your questions in the chat window. And thank you, by the way, for coming and sharing your time with me on this live event. It's always really cool. I really enjoy myself, and it's great to have you here to interact with. For those of you who maybe haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing so. And vocal range, right. Vocal range depends a lot on the location of your secondo passaggio. So what that means is that as you go higher and higher, you have to be sensitive to where your voice wants to flip over from thyroarytenoid to cricoarytenoid dominant, cricothyroid dominant singing. That's still my chest voice. That's still my chest voice, although I can feel it starting to kind of tip over there, right? And that F sharp is right above, it's like right, there's a balancing point in there where it's starting to tip over onto the cricothyroid muscles. And the challenge is not pushing. None of that is pushed. I'm not forcing my voice to do that. I'm just engaged and allowing airflow. I'm focusing on my vowels and keeping them narrow when I'm at the bottom of my scale, and I'm allowing them to unfold and open as I ascend and being sensitive to what it feels like. That can be a challenging process. If you've been in the habit of pushing your voice to get high notes, then you have to relearn what that feels like to be at the top of your chest range without forcing it, like you want to keep on going higher and higher and higher and higher without flipping over. So that's sort of step one in learning about your range. You have to find that flip point, and that will tell you a lot about what your vocal range is, or in the parlance of singing instructors, your Fache, F-A-C-H-E. And then from there, the process of extending it becomes a process of getting more comfortable with that transition, getting more comfortable with how your voice resonates higher up, and matching the resonances, so that as you carry on, the transition from chest voice to head voice becomes quite seamless, and your listeners won't really hear a transition if you're matching your resonances, and that's all of those things working together. That's being narrow on the bottom. It's letting it open as you ascend. It's keeping the air moving through the line. It's being sensitive to resonators and making it all work. That sounds kind of complicated, and it can take some practice. But that's what so many of the exercises on my channel are there to help you do. The chest range exercises to help you align all of your vowels. The airflow exercises to hopefully help you become sensitive to airflow so that you can use it dynamically, increasing it as you ascend and allowing it to abate somewhat as you descend. And then the registration exercises that are on the channel as well, that help you, start the process of coming from upper register and going back up and through it. And I've got a new one of those videos that will be coming out, not this coming Friday, but the next Friday. I tried to get that done this week, but I just couldn't do it. So yeah, that's the process. Maz, excellent. You're very welcome. Thank you for asking. Yes, you're welcome too, Zorko. I hope that helps explain the range thing. FYI, I don't put a ton of importance on understanding Fache. Most of the most useful aspects of Fache are in understanding the strong points of our voices and where we might, place a tune in terms of key area, but it's not a limitation. Though the bottom range has more of a limitation than the upper range does. There are many, many, many baritone vocalists out there that masquerade as tenors, and that is completely doable. It's utterly doable. So if you're a baritone, that does not mean you can't sing high. It just means you have to learn how to do it. That's all that means. And that's kind of true. That's sort of a true statement for all of us, really. This was a really, really cool question. And it's probably something that from one time or another we all have to deal with. I have a head cold at present, but still need to sing in the morning. I have a stuffy nose, but no pain or sore throat. Okay, that's really key right there. The strange thing is my voice sounds better when I'm sick. While my chest and middle voice are not that great, my higher notes sound richer, fuller, and more resonant than when I was healthy. I am drinking more warm fluids and resting more, but the stuffy nose seems to help. This is strange and has happened to me before. Have you heard of this before, and why may it be? Maybe it's the gentler vocal TLC, or stuffy nose focusing the sound, or something else. Okay, really, really, really cool question. And this comes up from time to time, and this is why in my private practice, I have a deal with my clients where so I have like all, I have all the official sort of like, if you don't cancel within a certain time frame, I want to be paid for my lesson, blah, 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 like all sort of stuff that, people do. But another deal I have is if you're sick, but you come in and we check your voice, and so first of all, if it's painful and you got like a really, really sore throat or something, just don't, you don't have to come, you don't have to try it out. But if you're on the edge, if you're on the verge, you can't quite tell, then the deal is come in anyway. And if we can't vocalize you above the secondo passaggio, then you don't have to pay me for the lesson, and you just go, and that's it. Like, no harm, no foul, because the rule of thumb is if you can't vocalize over your secondo passaggio, then don't sing. Stop. You're too sick to sing at that point. So it's really important that this individual has no pain nor a sore throat. So it's probably okay for them to sing. They've just got some congestion. Voice sounds better when they're sick. Now, this can happen for a few different reasons. Sometimes when we've been training our voices for a while, and you get sick, you just don't have the energy to do all the things that you would normally do when you would sing. And oftentimes, that means that the old bad habits that tend to be high energy get left out. So you end up relying entirely on the technique that you've been practicing, and it's much easier, and you get a great sound despite being sick. It seems kind of weird and counterintuitive, but I personally have experienced this. And while I don't know if this is exactly what's happening for this individual, it's quite possible. It's quite possible that that could be the case. Now, the stuffy nose is interesting because if that's blocking everything up here, then it's forcing the air to come more fully out the mouth. Now, to have a complete vocal sound, some air has to come through the sinus cavity. We have to have that resonance there. Otherwise, we end up sounding D-nasal. And that's a kind of vintage sound. If I block my nose entirely, and that's not a complete vocal sound. We need a certain amount of sinus action. But if out of habit you've been putting too much air through the sinuses, then having that blockage could allow you to be more firmly planted on the vocal fold. In other words, instead of coming up too far, where it really lifts off, then you get a more balanced tone. Where I've got a balance between sinus resonance, and yet I'm still rooted at my on the vocal fold. So that could be part of it. I'm really, really glad to hear that this person's sticking with warm fluids. I'm going to go ahead and interpret that as not being hot, like being warm. And that is the recommendation. Warm fluids, not hot. And rest is super important because that's where we start getting into vocal fatigue. If you are sick, then you're probably not going to have as much energy as you normally would. So you have to be mindful that you can fatigue prematurely. If normally you sing for 45 minutes to an hour without any issue, but now all of a sudden you've got a cold and you're not sleeping well at night because your nose is all stuffed up, you might not feel horribly tired, but you're not as well rested as you might normally be. So more rest in between vocal takes, more rest in the ensemble is all appropriate. Because when you don't rest is when you're going to stop using all those big muscles and all of that energy down here, and you're going to start compensating here, and that's when you get into vocal fatigue and irritation and things like that. So let me catch up on what's going on up on screen here. Never heard about Fosh before. Is it vocal range? Fosh is the word. It's so much more than vocal range. It encompasses range, i.e., soprano, mezzo-soprano, alto, tenor, baritone, bass. But Fosh also incorporates the characteristics of a voice. So, within the tenor realm, you have like a spinto, lyric tenor, tenor robusto. You have tenor leggerio. And all of those Foshes have different attributes. Some are really slight, like a lyric tenor and a spinto tenor. It's, of marginal difference, really. I mean, if you're singing opera, then it makes a big difference. In the realm of popular music, I don't really worry about it that much for my clients. But again, I don't put a ton of emphasis on Fosh in my teaching, because we can do so much with good technique. We can sing tenor parts and be a baritone. It's entirely feasible, and people have amazing careers doing that. So that's what Fosh is. It's the fine designations of vocal range. Enjoy the questions and your responses. Thank you for your time and sharing. You're very welcome. Thank you for chiming in with that. I appreciate it. Daniel James, thank you very much, Daniel. I appreciate that. And yes, welcome. What am I talking about? Of course, welcome to the office hours, Daniel. Great to see you chiming in. JC's Radiant Ray. I too sing better when congested due to allergies in the fall and spring. It's true for you as well. Yeah. I think the main thing there is, as long as you're not getting a lot of irritation on the vocal fold, if you're not getting like a postnasal drip and having it gunge everything up back there, you're going to be probably okay. Even if that does happen, lots and lots of fluids in a very reasonable warm-up. But again, if it starts to hurt, man, you gotta stop. Let's take one. I think that's a quick one. I started to get committed in the warm-up, but I don't know if I'm ready to continue the other warm-up. Which one, Zoroko? Tell me which one you're working on. This was an awesome question. So let me have a sip of water here. I talk so much in these things, I have to be careful I don't get too dried out, and I need to take my own advice and make sure I'm supporting when I'm talking so much. So this is a very, very astute question. I just released in a warm-up video. Warm-up. Yeah, I mean, it's a warm-up, but they're really technical videos on working on the U and O vowels. I think those came out like Friday night or Saturday morning, depending on what time zone you're in. And this person said, I noticed at some points you are modifying the O to sound a bit like ah. Is this to aid navigation through the passaggio? Awesome. Very, very astute question, and absolutely right. It's generally referred to as vowel modification. So if I start here, let's do ah. I think it'll be fairly noticeable. Pardon me. If I do it with ah, it's all fairly narrow there. You can start to hear it widen ever so slightly at the top pitch. More there. hopefully there you can hear how it kind of opens. I always call it unfolding. I like to say unfold. Unfolding as I ascend towards the zona de passaggio, and then it narrows again as I descend. And it's important that it open. It's probably more important that we re-narrow. It's in the narrowing that we really enable our technique to cycle around. So if I did this, and I left it wide as I did my descent, that's where I start to get instability, and I start to get a tone that doesn't match. And it's really that the narrowing just makes everything go round and round and round. That becomes the technique. Always that narrow on the bottom, opening at the top, narrow on the bottom, opening on the top. That's what keeps us going round and round and round. General guidelines for warming up. How do you know you are warmed up? Interesting question. Interesting question. Okay. We want to be able to warm up efficiently, but at the same time, the rule of thumb would be that if when you're singing the song or songs that you're intending to work on or to perform, and you start the song and you feel comfortable and you're singing it as well as, or as close to as well as you might sing in a practice session, there's always this dichotomy between the stage and practice rooms. You know, you may have heard the old cliche, the best performances ever given are for no one. That's because they're in a practice room, or they're when the person's practicing. Because there's this release and relaxation that comes along with the solitude of practice that is very, very difficult to achieve on the stage. It certainly can be done. And it's something that all of us, I think, from time to time experience. I've certainly experienced it many times. I feel very lucky to be able to say. But that's always the struggle. That's why we practice so much, is to ingrain this technique into force of habit, so that when we take the stage, we can rely on the habits and execute in what seems like it's an effortless thing. But really, if you count the hundreds and thousands of hours of work that go into it, it's hardly effortless. So you know you're warmed up when you're getting close to that optimum performance. You might try warming up for 15 minutes and then singing your song and seeing how you feel. If it feels like you're doing it, if it feels like you're close to that optimum performance state. But it's such a personal question. It also depends, too, on the range of the song. So, for example, if you're singing Bohemian Rhapsody, which is way all over the place, right? It's up in the stratosphere, and it's got everything. Everything is in that song. Then you have a lot of range to cover as well, too. Another guideline for warming up is, what's the range of your song? Have you covered that range? Another guideline to think about when warming up is, are my vowels in alignment? So if I'm starting here, like, this is a comfortable range for me. Okay, those are in alignment. So am I warmed up? I mean, my vowels are almost always in alignment in that range. It's not a good judge for me. Noticing how you feel in your body and how it integrates with what you're singing can be a good metric as well to judge whether or not you're warmed up enough. If you're feeling like everything's really well integrated. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of this comes down to trial and error. Do your normal warm-up, take into account the range of the song or the songs that you're intending to sing. Do your warm-ups for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, sing the song, see how it goes. Did you feel warmed up? Did it feel rough? Did it just not feel good? Okay, then do 15 to 20 next day. Sometimes just exercising your body, getting your body warmed up. If I have to sing early in the morning, it behooves me to spend more time just moving my body, getting my body awake and ready for the engagement and the energy that is required for me to sing effectively. If I have to sing in my upper register, then that's even more. All of those things have to be taken into consideration. I hope that's a good response to that. That's Daniel James. That's an interesting question that often gets asked and is deserving of some thought and some pondering, I think, as well. Kimberly Ann Clark, what is the cause of vocal hoarseness? And I got another question. How do I get rid of being nervous to sing in front of some people? Okay. Hoarseness. Hoarseness is almost always due to an imbalance in your technique. So, and usually that imbalance is too much vocal fold engagement or tension. So examine your airflow, examine your breathing. There's a video on my channel, I think it's called like Apagio, the Apagio airflow thing, or what is Apagio, or something like that. And that explains the Apagio breath management system. I mentioned it earlier. There's another question about it. Shirley Emmons has a really, really great web post about it that explains the technique really, really concisely, and I would highly recommend that. There are exercises on the Apagio method on my channel, which you can have a look at. Full disclosure here, if you've been told to stick your stomach out and suck it back in to sing, the Apagio is going to go against that. That is one of the principal pieces of misinformation that I feel gets reiterated over and over and over in singing technique, principally because it's easy to observe. To observe the Apagio breath management system, it's much more subtle than that. It's more challenging to teach, to do it correctly, and it's more challenging to observe it because it doesn't look like anything. There's very little motion that occurs when you're using the Apagio breath management system in singing. Very, very little motion across the rib cage and the abdominal muscles. So I feel like oftentimes we're told to stick our stomachs out because it's easy. It's easy to observe and it's easier to do, but I do not feel that it really results in optimal engagement for singing. But don't take my word for that. Check out Shirley Emmons' website. Check out the teachings of Richard Miller in training soprano voices. He talks about it at length, and then check out the Apagio video. Nervousness is a very, very personal thing. There's a lot of trial and error that goes into dealing with performance anxiety, which is how I frame nervousness. I talk about nervousness in terms of performance anxiety. And so what I would suggest you do is to, if you're very uncomfortable in front of people, to the effect that you don't want to do it, then I would, for starters, create artificial performance environments. Record yourself, dress yourself up like you're going to do a performance for an audience, but just do a recording privately in your practice space. See if it makes you nervous. If it doesn't make you nervous, then you're going to have to go out in front of people and experiment on a live stage setting. But conquering performance anxiety, I think, is a misnomer. I don't think we conquer it. I think we learn to manage it. You can manage it to the effect where you don't notice it any longer. But that doesn't mean you get to stop managing it. And that's why I think of it as an ongoing process. So observe what you do in the hours before your performance. And if you have a really good performance, make a note of it so that you know, okay, I ate 2 hours and I had a salad. I didn't eat very much at all. It was 2 hours before my performance. I wore a black shirt. I warmed up an hour and a half before my performance, and then I did a short warm-up immediately preceding when I took stage. I made sure any of these things. I took you through, I mean, all that stuff about eating 2 hours and the warm-up schedule and the black shirt, that's what I do. That's part of my management system. And I have other things too. I don't know about the black shirt thing. I just do it. It makes me feel good. So, part of conquering nervousness and performance anxiety is being comfortable in what you have. Practicing, if you're singing on mic in front of people, then practice on mic. Create a facsimile of the situation that you're in. So practice on mic. If you're using wedge monitors, practice with some type of wedge monitor in your practice space. Or if you're using in-ears, and I really hope you are if you're in a really loud environment, practice like that. Recreate as much as possible the performance environment in your private studio and look at what helps and look at what hurts you, in terms of your nervousness. And then test it out, and then evaluate it, and test it again, and evaluate it. When we talk about going out to do the performances to see what's going to happen, and we're going to somehow get used to it over time, I think for some people that probably works. There's a certain amount of desensitization that you can do if you just constantly perform. I know that when I have done tours, by the end of the tour, I am in a very, very different performance space than when I enter into it. In a really cool place. If you've ever had the opportunity, or if you ever have the opportunity to do a tour of any length, I would say the longer the better if you can manage it. You come into an incredible performance place for yourself, which is really exciting. So that's kind of a beginning answer to that question. I do hope that helps. Performance anxiety is something that we all have to work on from time to time, I think. There are probably some that don't, but for me, it's always been a part of my performance practice, and it gets integrated into so much of what I do, being aware of it and practicing for it. Maz, I am glad I answered your question. Why so early today? Probably daylight savings time messed everything up. JAPADOGI. I'm sorry about that. I've begun saying 6 p.m. London time, just because I don't even know. I think we're on some kind of daylight savings time here. But I'm sorry that it got switched around on you again. Zoroko, airflow maneuver with the scale for male vocalist. Airflow maneuver with the scale for male vocalist. The one that uses the vowel, I believe, we and you, and also I feel I keep messing a little 1-3-5 scales, but I think I am overreacted a bit. Okay, if you're getting stuck and you're not sure if you want to move on, there was a video that I did, and this is the interesting thing about your question here is that if you feel like you're missing up on the 1-3-5 thing a little bit, there was a video I did. They're really long, but you could always do them in sections. It was a vocal warm-up that was done slow to fast. And I use a metronome in the video, so I really go very slow, and then I gradually go faster and faster on some very core exercises like those 1-3-5 scales and some of the other stuff. Try that and see if that helps you along. I believe that I cover a lot of vowels on there, but the main thing I'm thinking about is that the slower tempos will give you time to place those E's and oo vowels, and it will give you time to listen and think ahead on the 1-3-5. 1-3-5 is really an arpeggio. It's not a scale. A scale would indicate linearity. In other words, intervals of no greater than, I guess, an augmented second or minor third if you're thinking about a harmonic minor scale. But typically speaking, that's a scale. All those are skips, and that's an arpeggio. Just so we're all on the same page here. Okay. Okay, yeah. Rasp and distortion. I have to think about that. I have to admit, I the reason why is because I consider that to be extended technique for the voice, and I am concerned about putting a video out there that could be misinterpreted or done incorrectly, and that the acquisition of those techniques and how we use them are so specific, in my experience, to each individual vocalist that I have worked with on it, that I need to think about it a little bit. So I'm sorry, I've seen those questions, and I believe it's been you that's posted those before, and I apologize that I haven't addressed it directly. I have to think about it a little bit more and how I would approach that and how I feel like I could help with it. I really, really want all the videos on this channel to be helpful and informative. And so I need to figure out a way that I can do that in an inclusive way so that we can all benefit from it as much as possible anyways. So, but thank you. Yes, Daniel James, many factors. It's a dynamic process that will develop with practice and experience. Absolutely. You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Message retracted. Can you do a video about vowel modifications and how do they work? Sure. Let me make a note of it. I think, does pen work? Vowel modifications and how they work. Absolutely. Favorite bands and singers. What week is it? It changes from week to week. I have been, the past week and a half, I have been obsessing over the song To Make You Feel My Love, which is a Bob Dylan tune. I have not been listening to Bob Dylan sing it. I've been mostly listening to Billy Joel, and I listen to Adele sing it as well. And I'm thinking about recording a cover version of it. So I'm sort of experimenting with how I want to approach it. And I feel like I've got a good key picked out for me and for my voice. And I've got some ideas for arrangement. So I kind of obsess over songs more than I obsess over bands or singers. But I every once in a while, about once a year, I obsess over Jeff Buckley for a couple weeks, who's a singer that we lost way too soon, I'm afraid. I love the Beatles, and again, like once a year, I come back and have like a massive Beatles phase where I'll construct and reconstruct a bunch of their tunes. I actually did a Beatles EP a couple years. Well, now it's like quite a few years ago now. It's on iTunes. You can check that out, where I reinvented like 6 or 7 of their tunes or something like that. The thing with the Beatles is that harmonically and melodically, it's just so rich for us. Their music basically became a template for popular music in the 20th and 21st centuries. So to study the Beatles is to study everything that's come after. I have a funny, I like Wilco kind of, but I think I just more these days I'll go back and pick song to song to song, such as California Stars, which was a Jeff Tweedy, Jay Bennett setting of Woody Guthrie lyrics, which is a beautiful, beautiful song. I've contemplated doing a cover of that from time to time. Who else have I been listening to lately? Everyone. Well, I don't really listen to the Shins, but I like singing some of his songs because I like practicing in that range. He sings in a range that is similar to my own, and so it's always good to practice that stuff. I mentioned Bohemian Rhapsody. That's a song that I practice from time to time as well, just to stay sharp and on my game. Yeah, that's sort of what's on my playlist right now. Yeah. Humorously enough, I've been listening to a lot of non-vocal music lately. So I've been listening to Music for Airports by Brian Eno. I've also been listening to the Debussy piece called Syrinx, as played by a variety of flautists. I think the Jean-Pierre Rampal version is my favorite right now. though I think if I may so myself, I'm gonna out myself here. I'm also a saxophone player. I don't know how many of you knew that. But in what now feels like a past life, I was a professional saxophone player, and my teacher was Donald Sinta, and there's a version of him playing Syrinx, the same Debussy piece that you can find on YouTube, and it is strikingly beautiful, I think. So there you go. There's a snippet of what I listen to. Sitting and standing position. This is Zoroko. Do both. And again, it depends on your playing position. If you know you're going to be seated when you're performing, then it behooves you to do some practicing and dedicate some practice time to being seated. If you're going to be standing, then stand. I think that when we're first learning proper engagement, posture, and airflow, standing is a more instructive posture. It's easier to start that way. As your technique improves, I think the differences diminish greatly. I don't know. The nicest thing about standing for me these days is that I can move around a lot more. I might, shift on my seat a little bit when I'm seated, but when I'm standing, I can really walk around, move around. It's very easy to remember to move and become aware of my body and how it's working and not working. So yeah. Let's see here. What else we got? Gerardo. Hi, Jeff. I can't seem to develop a good vibrato at all. Any particular exercises you could recommend to develop one? Okay, so if you search my channel, you can find a video. I just did a couple videos on vibrato not too long ago, but here's the thing. Vibrato is the natural consequence of a well-aligned, well-engaged system. So if you are applying good, consistent airflow appropriate to the range that you are singing, and your vowels are well-balanced and well-aligned, in other words, you're using only as much vocal fold engagement as is necessary to create the right balanced vocal sound, then in singing longer phrases, you will start to notice it will start to come of its own accord. You'll start to feel a little shimmy. It may feel like a quaveriness or a waveriness to the voice. It might feel uncomfortable. It may feel unstable, like it's going to crack on you or something like that. And those are usually, oftentimes, very good indicators that you're getting the right balance. And when that starts to happen, you get an interplay between the engagement of the vocal fold and the engagement of your air column. And when that happens, you can get the vibrato to start coming. So the vibrato videos that I did are some exercises and some vowel combinations that kind of, they sort of bait the hook, if that makes sense. They're if you've got good airflow and you're supporting well, and you've got reasonably good balance, then the combinations of vowels and the ranges that they're in will kind of, they can kind of coax you along. But you got to focus on engagement. Make your focus on your expansion and engagement of the air column. That's a really, really key aspect to developing vibrato, because without it, you're going to be relying too much on vocal fold engagement, and that's going to stifle a natural vibrato. And I really feel like it's important for us to have a naturally occurring vibrato. If you're forcing it by doing a pitch waver with tension in the vocal fold, then in higher register singing, that becomes very choppy because it tends to break off the air column too much. So we've got to find that balance with the vocal fold engagement and the air column engagement. So check into that video and see if that helps. Yeah, check into it, and then come back to a live event again and let me know how things are going, or leave in a comment or something like that and see what that does. But yeah, focus on airflow for that one. JC's Radiant Ray. I like to sing sometimes well below where I'm most comfortable. However, singing lower is always a lot more work, softer and less agile. Might this improve with practice? Yes, I think it will. So long as you're not really pushing. If you're really, really like bottoming out your range, then I still think you can improve. It's going to be softer. It's going to be less in volume as you get down into the extreme lower end of your range. You can generate more volume. I have a little sip of water here. Got a new purple jug, by the way. I left my red one at the music store, and I shouldn't have left it, but they said they had it, and they can't find it now, which is a bummer. I really liked it. Anyway, I digress. If we need to sing lower, it's more advisable to focus on the resonances of your voice rather than the actual volume of it. So for me, I don't really like to perform much lower than a low C. Anything below that, and I start to, it's just not great for projection, and it is too far into the extreme for me. But even getting that far, when I descend to that point, I'm going to focus more on the resonance and let it be bright and light and kind of, well, bright and light. I'm going to have more presence down there than if I try to force it out. The other side of this is that sound connects to my upper register. So if I'm here and I'm pushing to be open, it's never going to sound the same when I get up. But a bright and light sound down there, it connects. It works. It all resonates in a similar enough way that it sounds like a continuous sound, and that's what we're looking for. So bright and light on the down stuff. Bright and light on the down stuff. Can you explain the sensation of singing from your diaphragm and what it should feel like? Some schools of thought say to relax it, and some say to push down on it, while others will completely dismiss. That kind of got cut off, but I assume it's just dismiss it. Okay. We're almost out of time, and I'm having a biryani tonight from like the most amazing Indian place across the street, so we're definitely gonna be timely here. But okay, so first of all, I've got to take all these questions on screen. I really appreciate it, but I'm gonna take just what's on screen now. I want to just give a shout and say I'm sorry I didn't even get to all the questions on the sheet, but I really, really appreciate everyone chiming in. I really, really, this has just been awesome. So thank you for your questions. Thank you for joining me tonight and interacting with me and with everybody else on screen and all that. It's really cool. So, diaphragmatic singing. Okay. The diaphragm is an involuntary muscle. So if someone tells you to relax it or tense it or make it tie itself in a knot, you can't do any of that consciously. Okay? The diaphragm is an involuntary muscle. This is why we keep breathing when we are asleep. Or if you've unfortunately had the experience of passing out, you keep on breathing. Okay? We have to influence the diaphragm's behavior with other muscle groups, the surrounding muscle groups. So when I talk about breathing, I talk about expansion, engagement of the rectus abdominis muscles, and the rectus abdominis muscles are the six-pack. Those are those front abdominal muscles, and we lift and engage those, and we lift them up and inwards towards the sternum. Your diaphragm is way up high. In fact, it connects, the middle of the diaphragm connects to the sac that your heart is in. It's really much higher than most are aware of. And what happens in the Apagio breath management system is that the engagement of those rectus abdominis muscles and the intercostal muscles between your ribs and the inner and outer oblique muscles, when we expand the rib cage like that and we engage those muscles, the diaphragm will push back. And that creates the suspension and this energized air column that we rely on in the Apagio breath management system. So Apagio is the type of breath management that's taught in bel canto, in classical Italian singing. but it is just as applicable to us as popular musicians. And as I frequently say, the understanding of that and the implementation of it in my singing practice has had the most dramatic effect of anything I have ever done as a vocalist. It literally changed everything about how my upper register responded and the ease with which I could transition from thyroarytenoid dominant singing to cricothyroid dominant singing without question, period. So the thing is that it's not so much that we want to focus on the diaphragm. We're focusing on the surrounding structures. We're focusing on keeping the ribs. If this is I think you can see me, my ribs. If this is the neutral position, there is my expanded position, and I'm going to maintain that at all times when I'm singing a song, even in the short breaks. So that's going to stay open. We want to keep it open. In other words, we're not going to let it collapse. You have to keep it expanded and engaged. So yeah. You're very welcome, JAPADOGI. Maz. Jeff Buckley is, yeah, man. He is amazing. If those of you out there have not heard of Jeff Buckley, I think perhaps one of the most amazing things out there is on YouTube. There's a video of him. It's Leonard. He's singing Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, but it's not the one from the album. That recording, he did Hallelujah for the album Grace. But there is an alternate take, and it's just Jeff Buckley and electric. He's playing his Telecaster with a clean sound, and it's like an outtake or a second take or something like that, and it's stunning, absolutely stunning. Would highly recommend quickly searching for that. Standing most of the time is excellent, Zoroko. Very good. Zion 0. So having a natural vibrato means that the singing technique is proper. I used to have a natural vibrato and my voice resonates more on my chest. Fair enough. Fair enough. Many of us feel that experience, on the chest. That doesn't change the fact that the voice is produced here. The vocal fold is there. But we can feel that there for sure. Zoroko, will you do a video of how to record yourself with a phone? Interesting. Sure, why not? I do have to make a note of that. It's going to be a real short video, I'm pretty sure. Record with phone. I mean, because basically when I suggest people record with a phone, it's just to have any kind of objective listening device. You can just listen to yourself when you're not actually creating the sound. But I'll think about that. How about a series, How to Sing Like, and using one of the popular, interesting songs by some vocalists like Robert Plant, how to get similar sounds, what should we avoid when singing songs, and so on. Interesting. I have given some thought to that. I haven't done it as yet because I've been concerned about copyright infringement. So that's my main concern with that. I am a member, a content provider, or whatever you want to call it, in good standing with YouTube. And I want to stay that way, not only because, it means that my channel has no strikes and all kinds of stuff like that. But I genuinely like to do things what I think of as the right way, and I like to play by the rules. So it's important to me that I not do things that would infringe on copyright stuff. So, but I will think about that. What I've thought about doing is just sort of mentioning the song and then showing how we might do vocal exercises to work on the tune. So that might be the way to go about it. Okay. Did a video on how to record. I already did. I answered that one. Now I can't anymore because I started to learn to pass the passaggio and to open my face. Now I can't do vibrato anymore, or it's not that natural. Interesting. I wonder about how you're utilizing airflow and if it's changed for you with the different resonances. Also, if you've changed any resonances by opening your face, and I have to assume that means a certain amount of sinus resonance, that if it's getting too far off of the vocal fold, if it's not focused on the vocal fold sufficiently to create that interplay. Thank you, JC's Radiant Ray. I really like that. That was a nice red water bottle, and it was a gift from my wife too, which was kind of a bummer. Zion Zero, I see you're running out of time. Thanks again for doing so. You're very welcome. Thank you for coming out and participating. I really appreciate it. Jake, 3048. How to manage getting caught up on consonants through phrases that are a mouthful. Yeah, the short answer to that is focus on the vowel sounds. So what you can do is practice the line with no consonants at all. Just pick out the vowels and practice the line in rhythm with only the vowels, and then put like 10% consonant back. It'll sound like you're slurring your speech. That's okay. That's what practice is for. Then go to 20, 25 and find that sweet spot for where you've got a good line in a good musical phrase and you got enough consonants to be understood. Enough consonants to be understood will vary from genre to genre. So if you're in musical theater, you need a lot of consonants in your sound in order to be understood adequately. If you are singing a Radiohead cover, you don't. You can really, you don't have to be that intelligible in most popular forms of music. So that would be the practice for that. Thank you, Daniel. I'm glad that you could make it tonight. Or I think it's morning for you. And I'm glad you enjoyed it. I really appreciate you coming in. And same situation for last 3 lives. Oh, I'm sorry. You missed again. I'm sorry. I think it's the daylight savings time. That's why I keep on saying 6 p.m. London time. Because, quite frankly, I'm getting confused with the time zone switching thing and everything else. In any case, I'm going to sign off. Thank you all so very, very much for coming out tonight. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for the questions. For those of you that I'm so sorry I didn't get to all the questions here, but I'm going to get to these all in turn. So do keep on coming back. You can always send questions in via email, and I will answer them here. You can always post them in the chat, and I'll get to them as best I can. Thank you all so very, very much. I will see you next week, hopefully. Take really good care of your voices. Enjoy singing, and hopefully we'll see you again. Bye.